Kia ora, ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome to Citizen A. We wrap the week's current affairs with the best political team on television from a very Auckland perspective. Warning, we're as fair and balanced as Fox News. Joining me tonight on my revolving panel of bloggers and Auckland opinion shapers. She's a lecturer at the Department of Film, Television and Media Studies at the University of Auckland. Her hair is the only naturally growing antidote to Michael Laws. Digital feminist and blogger Phoebe Fletcher. And he is the Darth Vader of the blogosphere, minus the moment of redemption at the end. He's the thinking woman's bit of crumpet, if you define thinking woman as a rabid right-wing mouth foamer who would sell their children's body organs on the free market just to make a point about supply and demand dynamics. Storm blogger Cameron Slater, welcome to you both. Coming up tonight, issue 1, Hang On, Help is on its way. John Key sings a different tune over helping Rodney and Epsom. Issue 2, Stephen Joyce finds ways to make life tough for students, but should we be making life more difficult? And since when did education get downgraded to nice to haves? Issue 3 tonight, when the New Zealand Herald attacks the government, you know something must be terribly wrong. Why all the misuse of urgency under national? And we'll end the show on a final word, but let's kick things off with issue 1. After a week of columnist after columnist calling Rodney as toast in Epsom, John Key has come out and stated that he wants only a party vote focus in Epsom. What are the tactics at play and why are they important post-election? Phoebe, after the Heather Roy fiasco, which I'm sure we're going to hear a lot more about as we get closer to the election, why would female voters in Epsom vote for Rodney? Doesn't his bullying represent everything educated women in an affluent electorate would find distasteful?
I think there's a lot about the ACT Party at the moment that people in an affluent electorate would find distasteful. Not only the David Garrett affair, you've also had Rodney Hyde, of course, jumping overseas. But I think what's going on at the moment is that national, you know, we've had a sort of series of polls where it looks like they could possibly make the majority government. But their only real sort of coalition parties are the Māori Party, United Future and ACT. And basically they need 61 to 62 seats in confidence and supply to hold that government, and so I think we're seeing the moves now in order to, you know, open up ACT as a possible coalition partner.
Cam, the National Party, more so than the Labour Party, are structured at an electoral level to select a candidate minus the machinations of head office. How will forcing a weak candidate into Epsom by Key to help Rodney go down with the locals?
Well, I don't think that they can do that. For a start, there's more than 750 members.
Yeah, it's a strong seat, isn't it?
And so as soon as they get over 200 members, you're straight away into a electorate selection process.
Right.
The board can't override that. If they do, then they run the risk of alienating the locals. So you've had a membership drive there. A whole lot of letters went out at the beginning of the year. A whole lot of members have been signed up. There's 750 odd members and growing. There has to be a selection, basically by the constitution of the National Party, and yeah, sure, head office can make suggestions as to who should be selected or who shouldn't be, but ultimately it comes down to those delegates, and they will not be told what to do.
Can Key push it?
He can push it.
How far can he push it?
You've got a few people in the area around where John Key lives, around Parnell and that are saying, well, we'll do what John Key wants.
Right.
And ultimately people in the party do tend to take the direction from the leader, but he runs the risk of setting a precedent here because he hasn't taken part in any other selection process in making a suggestion, nor should he.
Yeah.
It's up to the locals to select the best person possible for that
Will
role.
it be Grosser?
Well, I hear that they've backed away on the Grosser issue.
Because he's too good? He would, wouldn't he?
Well, the thing is that right now the feeling is that a dog could stand and beat Rodney, and even Tim Grosser, who's you know a campaigning lazy person, I guess.
Have you seen the internal polling?
No, I haven't.
It's pretty dire though. Have you heard that?
Who ACT's internal polling or Nationals?
Nationals for ACT in Epsom.
Oh, I think everyone acknowledges that that ACT is in a dire position right now. There's a whole lot of machinations going on in attempts to create a co-leadership type arrangement with some other people, you know, on the right. There's been talks of Don Brash replacing Rodney in Epsom. I actually think Don, if he was going to do that, he should contemplate actually standing in Tamaki and taking out Alan Peachey.
Really?
That would be a far more sensible thing to do. Then they've got a double jeopardy type situation there where they have the possibility of winning potentially 2 electorate seats rather than just relying on winning Epsom.
Phoebe, despite all these cheap brain fart TV opinion polls claiming 150% of New Zealand loves John Key, the reality is that National can't gain over the 47% they would need to govern alone. So they're going to need coalition partners. If Dunn goes and Rodney gets knocked out or crawls back in with only 1 extra MP, can National turn to the Māori Party, or will Hone's civil war have split electorate votes, returning most of the Māori seats back to Labour?
Well, I think, you know, National are really in an interesting situation. In terms of the zero budget, they've also been talking about cutting the Families Commission, which of course is Peter Dunn's baby, and that is one of their key electoral policies for which people vote for that party on. So, you know, although he's really only got 1% for his party vote, you know,
that's him and his wife voted.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah, that's right.
You know, but National are facing this sort of situation where they have effectively split the Māori Party. It'll be really interesting to see the results of that with Hone Harawira, and that they absolutely do need to try and secure coalition partners, because Selwyn Manning was talking about this a couple of weeks ago, but the wild card, of course, is Winston Peters.
That's right, that's right.
And Winston Peters at the moment is lining up a lot with Labor in terms of its policy, in terms of retaining land ownership, cutting taxes to the rich and so on. And this is a kind of economic environment, I guess, where someone like Winston Peters would do well, because, you know, countries tend to turn nationalist, as we've seen in the UK, France and so on.
We thought he was going to go to the right. That was the feeling, that he was going to put out a couple of policies that would be much more...
Oh, that's dead cert what he was going to do.
But he's not now, is it?
But like everything, you can't trust a single word that Winston Peters says, because he was the one who was putting out that they were going to go to the right. He was the one that was shopping that to the commentators, that these were the 3 core policies that they were going to run on.
He was doing that.
He personally was doing that.
But there's been a change, hasn't there?
And then he's had a change, and he's decided he's going to throw his lot in with Labour, because he's realised that National people will not have a bar of him. We know what he's like.
But when you're actually in the election and he has out there and he's barnstorming, he has got a... You've been reading his speeches, right? They're very populist, Cam.
Yeah, well,
He'll get over 5%.
No, he won't.
You don't think he will?
And wherever he stands, I'm going to stand against him.
When National have the most votes on election night, but don't have the parliamentary majority, leaving Labour, the Greens, New Zealand First, whatever's left over from the Māori Party, plus Hone and a friend, how will you, as a far-right blogger, start to spin the illegitimacy card and attempt to gain public support for the new ex-army, ex-spy boss Governor-General to hand the ministerial warrants over to John? When do you start spinning it?
Nanoseconds after the results come in. Absolutely. But it's not going to happen, because if you look at all the things that Labour and the left wing and you and your fellow comrades have been spinning, that these things can't be done. John Key's this, he's John Key's that.
So you honestly believe...
You guys...
I want to get this on the record. You honestly believe that National, under John Key, can get over 47%?
It's not that I believe it. I think that of all the things, everyone says things can't be done, and that says more about them than it says about the other people.
But you know that 45% was partly because you had a magnified impact on the right wing, because it was the 3rd lowest turnout ever, and a lot of people went with the change mantra without knowing what the change was. Well, they've got a fairly good idea now, haven't they?
Well, the polls would suggest that you don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, although I think, you know, it's only a couple of weeks after, you know, we got the declarance that we're at 4.5% inflation. I think there's also a lot of people on the right that are beginning to wonder about National's economic policies, because we've had tax cuts and a rise in GST, and it is beginning to affect consumption.
They're not going to. People on the right are not going to vote for Labour.
And you know that there are lots of questions about those polls. Lots of questions about the weighting.
Well, you keep talking about that, but
the fact that they don't use, they only use landlines, not cell phones.
But you know,
and in a recession as steep as
these
this,
are all
I think that's magnified.
Pathetic excuses to justify why you're not scoring well in the polls. I mean, Helen Clark used to call every poll a road poll.
My comeback to that is that you and your right-wing friends were hopping up and down and saying that it was Banks and Len Brown neck and neck until the actual results started coming in, and then suddenly it was a landslide to Len. I would suggest,
but there wasn't a public poll that even supported that contention. There were internal polls that were being shopped and massaged.
There were neck and neck polls out there in the media. I would suggest that the right wing have actually got their political radar off kilter.
Well, you keep hoping and praying for that.
I think
Both of
perhaps
you,
not
yep.
off kilter, but I think, you know, this is a point as elections come up that there's, you know, a few months to go yet. What's going to happen is both of those parties are going to start digging up dirt on each other. And there's always the
That's all
pre-election
Labour ever
shocks,
does,
and they
yeah.
do
How does that
impact
work?
on the polls. Well, no,
How's that
National
going?
does
Okay,
it too.
question to both of you. Question to both of you. Will Charles Cheval roll Peter Dunne? You think it's possible?
Well, Katrina Shanks hasn't got a hope of even challenging Peter Dunne. As long as she does his usual performance, then Peter Dunne's vote should hold up.
You don't think it's going to go down?
But if anyone can beat Peter Dunne, it's Charles Cheval. But
The electorate is a very, very large public service electorate. They know a vote for Peter Dunne is a vote for National, more public service cutbacks. How are they going to go?
I think there's a strong chance that Dunn might hold it. I believe on iPredict he's polling about 55%
That's just
for that
Matthew
electorate.
Hooton's mates.
It is just Matthew Hooton's mates, but you've got to
Probably
remember
Matthew's
it's
spending $10.
That's right, yeah.
Oharu, it's Belmont, you know, this is, you know, kind of very wealthy, middle class, young professionals.
Yep. Public
I
service,
think
very
Dunn's
high
still
public
got,
service.
you know, got a chance there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Trough snufflers.
Question to both of you. Will a new right party launch in Epsom if National select a no-hoper like Aaron Batnaga? Will the pressure go, well, we're not being
my
given any
rumours are
options?
telling, my feelers and informants are telling me it's not likely to be a new right party. There simply isn't the time to get that up and running right now. There could, however, be an independent, a strong independent come and put their name in the hat for Epsom.
Okay.
But I'm not too sure on that. I haven't had that verified yet.
Peter Tashkoff's not giving you his call back.
I don't talk to fools.
Sure you don't. Your thoughts?
I would agree with Cameron on that
Yep.
one. I think there's not a lot of time to get that up and running, but you could see an independent come through. Yes.
Don
certainly.
Brash?
Well, who knows? I
John
don't know.
Banks?
Well, I think John would be incredibly silly to try that.
Well, yeah, okay, well, it's John Banks. Issue 2. Getting no more political traction bashing beneficiaries. Turn on greedy uni students.
Good.
Stephen Joyce has targeted overseas university students who haven't paid back their loans while clamping down on mature students like Cam from getting any loans at all. Phoebe, why is it always the bloody stick with this government? What about a student loan amnesty to tempt back the educated tens of thousands of Gen Xers who left the country? National were always screaming about the brain drain. How about a real attempt to woo them back?
The sticks work.
I mean, this is an interesting question. I mean, you know, in terms of the actual debate and issue, should people that are living overseas pay back their student loans?
Of course they
should.
Yep.
But in terms of this being a kind of push-pull issue that, you know, generates voter debate, this is one. I note that we had Bill English just last weekend saying that New Zealand could platform itself on us having lower wages, okay? 30% lower wages than
you've
Australia.
paraphrased that incorrectly.
I don't think I have.
I don't think she has at all. I think
Well,
she
you
nailed it
wouldn't.
perfectly. Go on.
You know, and this is a very good question. Why aren't we wooing these people back? You know, and there doesn't really seem to be much solid economic policy for looking at how we might be able to retain that talent.
Cam, this is pretty clever politics, isn't it? I mean,
course.
retaining
It's Stephen
interest-free student loans while starting a public flogging of overseas uni students makes the government look like they're sticking to their promise and not to end certain social policies while they still get to kind of crush public education, don't they?
Well, we've got a ridiculous situation in this country where we have a whole heap of people that are just taking from basically the moment they leave school. And then they bugger off overseas and they still want to take and not have any responsibility for the things that the country gave them, which was
A massive debt.
Well, it's not
Huge
massive,
debt
it's
that
a load
sits
of
on their
bollocks.
backs. Yep.
You know, someone who's a perpetual student like yourself, you know, and constantly living on the campuses.
Love the campuses.
That's an important issue. But
Yeah.
but most people actually finish their degree and start contributing to society. But the ones who bolt overseas aren't contributing. They've buggered off. They've taken from the country. And I think it's fair enough that they get a spanking.
Phoebe, eliminating funding for those over 55 when the government utterly gutted adult education services suggests the government have
Primary
moved
classes, things like that.
education into the nice to have rather than an essential function of a democracy. Why are we restricting education in a recession?
You know, this is a very good question, and to me, the
Asking a
restriction to
university
people
lecturer.
over 55 is really much more of an issue. I mean, we could wonder why are we electing politicians over 55,
allowing them to vote over 55
you know.
years.
But
Only a Logan's Run rule.
Yeah, that's what this is.
you know,
isn't
this
it?
is a very good question. I mean, there's all this talk about how there's been a 25% rise in student loan uptake since Labor did the interest-free. We're in an economic recession, right? I work in a university. Education is a boom industry in a recession because that's when
Especially
people
when you're
decide
chucking free money at people.
to retrain. No, it's not when you're chucking
Yes,
free
it is.
money.
It's called
there's-
reinvestment.
you know,
It's
if you
called
if you
social
look at most
reinvestment, Cam.
economies,
Well, we
actually
need-
you've
Education's a
seen.
positive.
We
It's
need
not a
thousands
negative.
more people doing BAs, do we?
I understand that
What
you
a
want
load
to
of
keep people
rubbish.
dumb and stupid, but we like
need,
an enlightened.
we need 25% more lawyers, don't we?
We want an enlightened
It's
populace.
bollocks.
It works.
I think, where are the options? We have seen, state services grow in its size, and that's something that we've seen across other economies too. I mean, I think, to some extent this idea is sort of a fallacy that everybody could be in paid employment, during a recession. Obviously, because it's so dependent on a kind of globalised economy that, we've had the head of the IMF say that it would only take one more shock, for economies to be in serious trouble. So I think, in some ways, in terms of education, there are reasons, solid reasons why people go back to retrain.
Yeah.
In terms of
Gives them something to do.
the kind of student loan legislation, I think the actual more dangerous legislation was the ones on people failing papers. Because I can tell you now, from being a teacher, that that's ordinarily not lazy students. It often
Stupid students.
no, it's not
no,
stupid
no,
students.
that's not
okay,
fair,
most
that's not fair.
Oh, you'll
most
be
people
using
you
John-
teach
you'll
are
be
very,
using-
very smart.
You'll be using
Right,
Phil
but
Goff's.
university is a particular kind of discourse, and it takes time to adjust to that discourse. Now, I would have to say, when I first started university, I didn't adjust to that straight away, and
So we're using
there
Phil
needs
Goff's
to be the
description,
opportunities.
winners and not winners.
Cam, the right wing are constantly singing the "we ain't got no money" blues.
That's true, we haven't.
when it comes to public
It's
services like
$300 million
education.
a week.
But we do have money to give $43 million to MediaWorks.
Oh, you
we had
bang
$30
on and
million
on and on about that.
to give
It's a
Warners
loan.
for the
It's a
manufacturing
loan to
crisis of The
MediaWorks.
Hobbit, $30 million to private education industry, $1.7 billion to Mr. McGill
Labour
at South
Party
Canterbury
guarantee.
Finance, and another $1 billion to AMI, who have turned up with their pockets outturned like Alan Hubbard's long-lost broke
Yeah,
son yelling,
I don't
"Me
agree with
too."
that one.
Why so much corporate welfare at the cost of social welfare? I mean, this you can't
Oh,
like
look,
this.
I
You find
don't
this
think
offensive?
South Canterbury Finance should have been bailed out. They should never have been in the deposit guarantee scheme in the first place.
And
So-
there were opportunities to have left them out, weren't there? that weren't
Absolutely.
taken
So
up?
there's something fishy there. AMI, they should have just been tipped over. They had a failed business model, and it is actually criminal, I think, to bail out a failed business model. The market says if you've got a failed model, fail. See you later.
And corporations
and
can fail.
and
right?
those people paid for policies at AMI, and AMI, the management of it, and also the rationale behind it, having the cheap policies, were undercutting everybody else in the
That's right.
insurance market. And then you find out when
falls over.
it falls
Yeah,
over.
yeah.
Well, that's tough luck. It's hard,
yeah,
but
yeah.
it's tough luck. You can't keep cushioning people from the realities of life. And that's the problem that we've got with corporate bailouts. It's also the problem that we've got when you have things like working for families and trying to cushion people from the realities of life. It doesn't work, and someone has to pay for it, and eventually other people's money runs out.
The redistribution of wealth within a society is one of the blessings of secular democracy. Why are you shitting on it?
I don't believe in it.
I mean, it does have a point there with the South Canterbury Finance,
Yeah.
though, and that they could have easily recapitalised that, at a cost of around 500 million. Now it's, we're looking at 1.5 million.
keeps going,
This is the
doesn't it?
kind
They
of
should never
700
have
million
been in
that's
the-
already
in the-
missing
in the
from the
first
budget.
place.
It's interesting that AMI is too big to fail, but public education isn't. Okay.
Well, it's not
Question to
failing,
both of
it's
you. Question to
billions
both
and
of you.
billions spent on public
Isn't
education.
that not enough? Isn't the reality that students leaving overseas will simply work harder at disappearing? Isn't that what's going to happen?
No.
No, I think this is being overplayed. I mean, if you look at the stats,
by
it is
Bomber.
$2.3 billion, but the amount of that overdue was much, much less than that. I think most students do pay back their student loans, and in fact, if you if you go to many economists in New Zealand, they recommend that if you have a student loan, that you go overseas to earn the wages that you could not earn here to pay it back. To pay it back. So,
a question to both of you: why not reduce the total amount students borrow by introducing a universal allowance, so they aren't clocking up debt from simply living while studying? Doesn't the debt simply incentivise students to flee New Zealand?
No, that'll just
Aren't we
encourage
making
more
it a
people
problem?
like you, perpetual students with a universal allowance, you know, and people like Idiot Savant who sits there ranting to the.
Does a very good job of taking you down from time to time.
He
doesn't
never
it?
takes me down.
So,
For a start, he doesn't allow comments, so
why,
he's a coward.
But why aren't we sowing our own seeds of problem here? I mean, we're lumping all of these debt on these young
It's
folk,
not.
and they're going overseas to pay the bloody thing off, aren't
The
they?
whole idea behind getting an education, getting degrees, getting
It's
higher
a social
education,
contract.
it's what a
You
load
do
of
well,
absolute bloody rubbish.
You provide back to your society. You've been given a chance for education.
And how many
you
of
do
those
things.
students think about wanky, lofty, liberal ideas like social contract?
Not many, because they've
they're
been
not.
taught to be selfish right from the
What
beginning.
they're
and
thinking
they know
is, if
what
I
their
do this
fees
degree,
are.
I can go and be a lawyer. I can
Because
get
that's
this
what
much
it's
back.
been reduced to. That's what it's been reduced to. It's a sad, sad.
Oh,
you know,
pathetic.
the average loan payback time is around 6 years. It's down from 10 years. So
Yep.
most students
But
are
Bomber was
responsible.
screaming about a lifetime
What
of
is
debt.
happening is that this
It
is
is
a
For 6
push-pull.
years.
It is.
You know, National are very good at identifying these kind of push-pull voter
That's
issues,
right.
and this is being sort of somewhat blown
this
out
is-
of proportion.
Who
This is
wins,
whaling.
who loses by making life more difficult for tertiary students? Who wins, who loses?
Oh, you know, I
National
think the
wins
country loses in many ways because, you know, if people go overseas, then we have to attract that talent back. On
Yep.
the other hand, I do think that if you do live overseas, you should have to pay back your loan in
Amen.
the same
So
way
we're going to
that people
attract
do
the
in New
talent
Zealand.
back by electing talentless hacks to go.
Like John Key. Thank you, panel.
Phil
Coming up, when the New Zealand Herald attacks the government, you know something must be terribly wrong. Why all the misuse of urgency under National? What's the rush? Citizen A is back after the break. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is Citizen A. We're reviewing the week with bloggers Phoebe Fletcher and that awful Cameron Slater. Issue 3 tonight. The New Zealand Herald published a damning editorial of the government's misuse of urgency this week. In only 2 years, National have used urgency 31% of the time. This represents the largest dismantling of democratic oversight when it comes to law that this country has ever seen since Roger Douglas. Why the bloody rush? Phoebe, the
Getting
New
things
Zealand
done,
Parliament is one of the easiest... Is your name Phoebe? Phoebe, the New Zealand Parliament is one of
phoning
the
it while I'm
easiest
interrupting.
places to pass law in the Westminster system. Invoking urgency as often as this is simply a recipe for lazy, stupid, ill-thought-out law, isn't it?
Yes, and didn't Rodney Hyde get caught out on that on the Auckland Local Government Act? You know, this is the issue, is that there's this kind of argument that Parliament is not sitting for enough hours, therefore we need urgency to extend the hours to get things through, that, you know, Parliament should be run like a business.
Good idea.
You know, are we Nigeria? Are we a dictatorship? You know, we
Yes.
actually we are a democracy,
Yeah,
and
I
we
know
do
it's
need to
difficult.
hold
I
on
know,
to those
I know.
democratic functions. I note the New Zealand Law Society has been doing a really good report
Yes,
on the use
yes,
of
yes, yes,
urgency,
yes, yes, yes,
and
yes.
the thing is that, you know, it's not just about ramming legislation through. They would only usually do one stage on a bill
That's
per,
right, that's right,
per
that's right.
sitting.
Not the entire
and
bloody thing.
urgency can overrule question time. What it means is that MPs have the legislation rushed through, they don't have the opportunity to debate
select
properly,
committee, yep.
they don't often have the opportunity to see the papers beforehand.
Yeah,
so
yeah,
we're
yeah.
getting sloppy legislation that has been
yeah.
pushed through. We've
Yep.
had 17 bills since National were in power.
Yep.
They are on track to be the biggest users
Yeah,
of urgency
yeah, yeah,
since
yeah,
the multi-party
ever, that's
system
right.
began.
Cam, you are a champion for transparency and the public having their say. You must be pretty disgusted with your good friends in the National Party abusing process as badly as this and denying the type of oversight that we require in a
Oh,
democracy.
I think it's actually a very simple issue, and it comes down to the fact that Air New Zealand took away the hot dogs out of the Koru Club Lounge in Wellington, and as a consequence, Jerry is out there hoovering them up from around the streets of Wellington to get the energy to try and do his job. He's the leader of the House. It's his issue that they haven't managed this properly, and he's buggered it up. He's made it into a dog's breakfast, and between him and Simon Power, ushering through the latest bout of urgency, they have screwed it up. And it really just comes down to poor House management on those two. But, I mean, ultimately...
So you just put it down to incompetence?
Yeah, simple. I don't, you know, why have we got all of these stupid laws going through? And a lot of them are ridiculous. Honestly, they're just ridiculous, the amount of legislation that politicians dream up. You know, we should actually have some sort of law in place that says for every law you put in, you've got to make sure 2 are taken out.
Yes, crazy Cameron world again. Put the children away. Don't let them listen.
Come on,
Phoebe,
that'd be
here's
great.
what
We
the
need
New
less
Zealand
laws, not more laws.
here's what the New Zealand Herald editorial said. The widespread use of urgency always says more about a party's weaknesses than its strengths. It suggests it may not
Jerry
be
Brownlee.
comfortable enough with the rationale for a piece of legislation and its MPs' understanding of its details to usher it through the normal parliamentary procedures. Shouldn't that level of manipulation cause calm?
Yeah, I think, you know, in terms of MP's level of understanding, the Copyright Amendment Bill was a classic example of that. There were just some absolute whoppers posted on the net
why
of
didn't
Melissa Lee and
but
so on, trying to
why
describe
did
file
they push
sharing. It
that
was very
through?
clear that many of our
Just
MPs
ridiculous.
can't even use the internet.
Bowing down
But, you know,
before
there have
corporate
been,
America.
this is a very good question, and that there have been very major pieces of legislation that have been pushed through. You know, under urgency. So we're talking about some irrelevant laws. You know, I don't really agree with maybe perhaps your hot dog analogy, but, you know, we've had the Copyright Amendment Bill, we've had, you know, the Auckland Super City Organisation, which is another one that they flubbered. You know, these are major pieces of legislation, the 90-day right to hire and fire.
They did make
you know,
a
we're
mistake
talking
on that.
about...
It should have been 180 days.
Cam, the truth here is that democratic process bores people to tears,
Absolutely.
right? I
was
mean,
yawning when you guys were going on
National
about
have
it.
found a way to circumvent democratic process that the mainstream media will barely bother with. The conclusion is National will just keep ramming more and more law through, won't it?
Well, no, not really, because, you know, making laws and doing all that sort of thing is mind-numbingly boring. Have you ever watched Parliament?
I love it, love it.
Yeah.
I'm
makes you
an
hard,
addict
doesn't
for
it?
it. A little bit. Question to both of you. Why did the legislation to cut us off from the internet in a setting where you are guilty until proven innocent for the benefit, as you were saying, of corporate music and movies, get
Thieving wankers, really.
get tacked onto urgency legislation aimed at the Christchurch earthquake? What's the connection?
I mean, this is a very good question. I think if they go under urgency, they absolutely need to restrict it to one bill per session. You shouldn't be having multiple bills lining up. In terms of the Copyright
That's
Amendment
Simon
Act,
Power.
that one actually went through Select Committee.
Yep.
You know, although there
They
is a
didn't listen
real
though, did
danger
they?
at the moment that a lot of these bills aren't going through Select Committee. On the Copyright Amendment Act, yes, there absolutely was pressure from, you know, big American organisations who we all know who they are. But certainly it's interesting that there are actually, you know, challenges going through the UK courts at the moment by telcos who are saying that it's an absolute invasion of privacy. So it was an issue that needed to be examined further. It's one that caused huge outrage the first time that Labor came up with Section 92A.
It was Tizard.
And it's something that it absolutely needed to be better considered.
Who wins, who loses? Who wins, who loses with this massive misuse of urgency?
Well, I think your analysis that the vast majority of the voting public couldn't really give a toss.
They don't.
Means that National wins because they can get things done a whole lot quicker.
If Labor had pulled stuff like this, you'd be screaming bloody murder.
Oh, well,
wouldn't you?
David Farrar was screaming bloody murder the other
yeah,
day.
yeah.
But it
He's
was
not happy with it.
But it was a blog post of 2,000 words and mind-numbingly boring. Most people gave up after the first paragraph.
Let's wrap the show with the last word. Phoebe, your last word this week is?
My last word is I would like to congratulate Auckland Zoo on releasing the list of Easter eggs that don't have palm oil. I'd also like to point out that in terms of buying
that's
chocolate
important.
for Easter, okay, there has been a war going on the Ivory Coast, you know, for quite some time, and there have been many Ivory Coast people that have faced murder, rape, and so on. So please make sure that your eggs are also free trade and this Easter, and that you're also looking after people as well as animals.
That's very kind. Cam, your final word this week is?
Well, I was looking after animals just recently. I was on a great big Easter bunny shoot and looking after those very well with a 17 HMR. But my last word is for Len Brown, and he campaigned on being open and honest and transparent.
Good
opening
man,
the books.
doing good things.
And his council so far has done completely the opposite. He had board appointments held in secret, and he also recently handled the funding issue with the Maori Statutory Board completely in secret. Yeah. So Len Brown is actually turning into be an electoral liar.
It's incredibly difficult to clean up after the mess of Rodney Hyde, isn't it? Thank you, Phoebe. Thank you, Cam. Ladies and gentlemen, to my final word. Whānau, we face the steepest economic recession since the Depression. We know from the social carnage caused during the economic turmoil of the 80s and 90s that it is our society's most vulnerable that bear the brunt of such change. We should never forget, as we look to relegate community safety nets to nice-to-haves, that our suicide rate trebled to the shameful OECD levels that they are today during the last great pruning of the state. All publicly funded sectors are eyeing the forthcoming zero budget with concern, as what is needed in all sectors as they tackle an ever-growing tide of demand is not austerity, it is social reinvestment. It is difficult to reconcile the growing list of corporate welfare with continued cutbacks to public welfare. I've never fully understood why the most vulnerable in society are asked to do with less for an economic crisis they had no hand whatsoever in causing. How many solo mothers were on the phone to their Wall Street stockbrokers in 2007 buying sweet light crude in euros while speculating on Goldman Sachs derivatives? In the words of Scribe, not many, if any. Attempting to combat an economic recession caused by low-tax deregulation and free market dogma by implementing more low-tax deregulation free market dogma is as counterproductive as making Rodney Hyde your workplace anti-bully liaison officer. In 2008, New Zealanders threw out Helen Clark because she was leading the stormtroopers of the nanny state dichocracy into your homes to force you into using water-saving shower heads and power-saving light bulbs. Yet this government strip away our right to jury trials, passes laws making you guilty before innocent, and slashes public welfare while handing out corporate welfare, and not a whisper. If Labour had pulled half the crap National do weekly, the New Zealand Herald would be printing Molotov cocktail recipes alongside the addresses of cabinet ministers. If you like tonight's show, please join our Citizen A Facebook site and connect with other like-minded news citizens, and follow me on my Citizen Bomber Twitter and Citizen Bomber Facebook page. Thanks for watching, whānau. Good night, Aotearoa.
Supporting local content so you can see more of New Zealand on air.